As we approach the end of 2025, it's starting to become apparent that the moat provided by Cardano's new privacy layer, Midnight, may be much deeper, wider, and more foreboding than we could have possibly expected. If your only real goal right now is just to surround your bank account with a deep moat of ducats, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. All right, everybody, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. Who have we got here? Brown bearded hermit with an update on our overmind question. It's called overmind. He says, hey, yo, AOS. Charles was on a space earlier and mentioned overmind. He said they used it to poke a hole in several drafts of the Midnight White Paper before reaching the final published one. Makes perfect sense. Good use case for AI, for large language model AIs. Turns out Overlord is an LLM. This is Overmind. Overmind, they developed and had it ingest every crypto code base and white paper they could find. This is really interesting. Sort of bespoke LLMs trained on crypto stuff. This is going to be pretty interesting. I mean, you could argue that, most, the white papers are all sort of public, a lot of the code bases are public. So a lot of it's public, and LLMs that have access to public things on the web, are going to have access. But the use cases for AI that's particularly aimed at crypto, I think we'll be able to do some cool stuff over the coming years. So Overmind, yep. Hilldog, thanks for joining, and thanks for that update, brown bearded hermit. I appreciate it. Thanks for the update. Eric Williams says, "Let's go." Hilldog and Eric Williams, thank you for joining. 8 Eclipse is here. Joe Davidson is here. Exciting year ahead for sure. Yep, absolutely. The more I read about Midnight, the more ridiculously bullish I become. Yep. Blue Mammal says, "What's up, players? Who's in the Midnight Discord?" Everybody should be in the Midnight Discord because that's where all the things about Midnight are going to go on. This is sort of like Charles has said it recently. He tried to fix all the mistakes he made with Cardano in Midnight, and one of the big ones is he wanted to eliminate all of the crazy trolling going on X. He's definitely not down with X. I don't think it's sustainable even for him to be on X. So Midnight is where most of the things are going to go down for us. And Midnight in Discord will have moderation like Discord normally does. We want to put up with the crazy trolling. Afro in the Wind is here. Let's go. Let's go Afro in the Wind. Thank you for joining. Brown bearded hermit is here. We know that. Yep, we know. 8 Eclipse is here. Anyone else hearing that one or more banks might be failing due to their silver short position? We talked about it last night. We'll touch on it again tonight. Jeff Byrne is here. Let's go. Tulane Tulip is here. Thanks for joining. 8 Eclipse is maybe extra liquidity incoming to save the banks. Yep, it happened today. It already happened. A little bit already happened today. I keep buying these falling knives. Wish me luck. Good luck. Good luck. Binocam is not dead. That's good. Samuel Flores is here. Thanks for joining. You have a link to Midnight Discord. Look at one of Charles included it in one of his recent posts. In one of his recent posts, he had an invite to the Midnight Discord. Maybe somebody can put it into the comments for you too on this live stream. Hey, okay, Forerunner93 says, "Hey, AOS, what do you think about the likes of Canton stealing Midnight's thunder? Starting to get the feeling the future of crypto will be recreated by existing TradFi and Web2 and avoid us." I mean, this is the same. I've said it recently in a recent video. We were talking about Canton. I don't know much about Canton. People told me that it's sort of half private, half public. The magic of crypto is decentralization. If you do not have it, you do not have the magic. Your wand is a stick. Your wand is simply a stick. It does not have the magic. Similar to something you might say to a dude competing for the same girl with you at the bar. Your wand does not have the magic. Jeff Burns says, Elon shit the bed with X and bots. Yeah, I mean, it's a really hard problem to solve. I remember people asked Elon about this early on, and he talked about how difficult it is. It's sort of it's a lot like a lot of things in crypto. Part of the tension is between permissionlessness and you know, the benefits that would come from proof of human, right? So you could have some form of proof of human on X, but then you wouldn't really have permissionlessness, and you wouldn't really have anonymity, right? I mean, you could argue it's difficult to have anonymity now, because we're all tied to an IP address, but we also have VPNs, so anonymity is kind of possible on X right now. It'd be a lot harder if we had proof of human. So I think the bots problem is pretty difficult. There's all kinds of behavioralistic ways they try to identify bots, but with AI, all that's getting harder now too. So it seems to be pretty complicated. And Yorick is here. Thank you for joining. Thanks for joining. Good to see you. Hilldog says Charles is AI clone on X moving forward 2026. I'm interested to see it. Illusion says evening. Charles dropped into Cardano over midnight X space tonight, shortly after the 2:30 mark. I was out and about, so didn't get to hear the complete discussion, but informative. Yep. Sounds like that's what maybe that's where Brown Bearded Hermit heard the tidbit he related about Overmind. Otis Freechove, thank you for joining. Let's go. 123 Kid says, hey, big fan, you're killing it. Thanks. I appreciate you saying that. That's very nice of you. And New York says, making ghee and tallow tonight for good health. Oh, man, you're talking my language. As a carnivore. I love it. Binocam says, oh, here you go. Here's that address for you. discord.gg/invite/midnight network. There you go. Thank you, Binocam, for delivering on that. Brown Bearded Hermit says, note that the invite link does not include either 69 or boob, but is correct. People who saw that video a bit ago will remember that that was the policy ID for night tokens. Is that what that was? I can't remember what it was. We talked about it. We talked about it in detail. We talked about that one in detail. I think that was the policy ID for night tokens, but somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that. I meant midnight over coffee X space. Are we still waiting for something massive? We are. We're gonna have to ask that dude when that all goes down. We're gonna have to ask that dude. I mean, people reported back that both he and Charles said that was kind of a joke or something, but I don't think you can just lay out a joke like that, like trillions in liquidity, have somebody else, as well known as Charles, say that he called you and that trillions of liquidity are still coming, and then not let everybody know pretty ASAP that you were just joking. That's a little too much. So I'm hoping there was actually something there. Okay, yep, that's the policy ID for night. Okay, let's jump in. And the reason I'm not trying to fault Charles for being involved in that. I'm just saying what I'm implying is they might, if there was actually something, let's imagine there's person A and person B, and person A hints they know about trillions of liquidity coming into the market, and they're both crypto people. Person B calls person A, confirms, yeah, he's talking about something real. It sounds like there's trillions of liquidity coming. And then they both realize how much that's going to sway the market, how much that's going to impact the market. And they're like, it's probably not good. We shouldn't be impacting the market that much. When the news relates to something in the future, this is probably not good. So then they walk it back. I'm hoping that's what happened. And the way I would walk it back, if I was both of them, is I would say, we were just joking. That was a joke. We were kidding. Obviously, we were joking. And then when the trillions of dollars in liquidity or whatever it is happens, you could say, oh, well, actually, we were joking, but here we are anyway, that kind of thing. So we'll see. Obviously, I think we're all hoping that somehow that works out and there is some kind of trillions of dollars in liquidity on our way. That'd be better for all of us, I think. Joe David says 1920s all over again. So let's talk a little bit about this privacy moat thing. So I think the midnight layer as a privacy moat for Cardano is a much bigger deal than we've been giving it credit for. It's not unlike having a very deep moat outside your castle, like this moat. This is a deep moat. This would keep the barbarians at the gate off your castle walls to a pretty good extent. If they actually have to swim across the moat, if they can't even walk across the moat, if they legit have to swim, it's dark enough, it's deep enough they can drown, drown. I think we're talking medieval times here, so maybe not even very many people can swim. This is a significant deterrent. Then if we've got sharks in it, then we somehow have freshwater great white sharks that don't exist in here. I know some people are going to say they've seen videos of great white sharks in some kind of tidal pond that they're going to claim was partially or fully freshwater, something like that. Okay. And these are supposed to be great white sharks, not bull sharks, which can go in freshwater. Anyways, I think this is the kind of moat we're talking about. And I think the rest of the crypto space is realizing it. And I think it's because it takes so long to do this kind of thing. First of all, you've got to have a way to create something, some kind of layer in your layerverse inside your ecosystem that's as functional as a partner chain is in Cardano, right? Most ecosystems would just try to do an L2. They would just try to create an L2 that maybe wouldn't be as functional, wouldn't be as connected to the L1 as our partner chains are. I mean, they're pretty interwoven, pretty tightly interwoven when you think about the fact that the night token is going to be the thing that emits the dust that's required as a gas token in midnight. But the night token itself was originally minted on the Cardano blockchain. So pretty interesting. I think this is a pretty deep moat, and we're starting to see some indications that the rest of the ecosystem is realizing it too. Here's a little, I don't know what we even want to call this, some kind of a policy paper, a statement by the crypto general partner at A16Z. The title of the paper is "Privacy Will Be the Most Important Moat in Crypto." Privacy is the one feature that's critical for the world's finance to move on chain. I think you can just stop reading right there. Privacy is the one feature that's critical for the world's finance to move on chain. You may feel a certain way about the world's finance moving on chain. You may read that and think to yourself, I don't want Goldman Sachs to come on chain. I don't want JP Morgan to come on chain. Or you might think to yourself, hey, RealFi is a part of finance. If this is what's critical for RealFi to move on chain, then I'm in favor of it. So you can feel whatever way you want about finance moving on chain. But however you feel, this is a pretty big deal. He says, privacy by itself is sufficiently compelling to differentiate a chain from all the rest. You could also just read that sentence, and that could be enough, because who's doing privacy better than Cardano right now? And you're probably already used to the fact that I'm just going to refer to Midnight as a part of Cardano, as the Cardano privacy layer. But who's doing, given that, if you can accept that, who's doing privacy better than Cardano right now? We talked last night about how you can differentiate what's going on in Monero, Zcash, and in Midnight. Monero was sort of mandatory privacy. Zcash is default privacy that you can just turn on and off as the user. But Midnight, it has ZK technology just like Zcash, but instead of just being the user turning it off, on and off, you can have selective privacy at the DApp level. The dApps can force disclosure. They can force privacy. If you want to use the DApp, they can force you to turn off, the shielding of required disclosures. Like they can say, hey, if you're going to use our DApp, you need to prove to us you are not a part of Lazarus Group in North Korea. You can have this selective disclosure where certain things are required to do certain things, and it's not just the users using the network when they want for payments, which is, I think, we can generalize and say that's largely been the case in Zcash and Monero. It was, I related the back in the day in Monero, and I'd hear people talk about Monero on podcasts. A lot of the conversation was sort of how useful Monero was for various criminal activities. And then with Zcash, it's like you can use it on a transparent basis, but if you wanted to do anything like that, you could turn on privacy. And with Midnight, we've got the selective disclosure. That's great. You can have privacy all the time. And the DApp can tell you, hey, if you want to use this DApp, you've got to give us certain disclosures. And you don't even need to tell us where you are. You just need to prove you're not in one of the following countries, that kind of thing. So there's a pretty big difference here. And I think this is right. I don't think A16Z is right about everything in crypto. In fact, I think they've been wrong about a lot of things. Maybe they weren't wrong, maybe from purely profit motive perspective, maybe they were right about a lot of things. But in terms of what was good for crypto, I don't agree with a lot of things, a lot of their approach. I mean, they're a VC, but I think they're right about this. Privacy by itself is sufficiently compelling to differentiate a chain from all the rest. Privacy also does something more important. It creates chain lock-in, a privacy network effect, if you will, especially in a world where competing on performance is no longer enough. You know, I hate anything that talks about locking anything. TVL, total value locked, is like my least favorite metric in all of crypto, but I think they make a good point here. If you have a need or desire for privacy and you want the most high-tech version of privacy, once you go to midnight, once you have your assets in midnight, are you really going to want to transfer out of midnight where you don't have any privacy? I mean, I guess you could go to Zcash, but like we said, there's a good argument that's a lesser high-tech version of a privacy chain. You go to Monero, and that's maybe even another step backwards. Certainly chronologically, both are steps backwards. So they might have a good point about this lock-in thing too. Thanks to bridging protocols, it's trivial to move from one chain to another as long as everything is public. But as soon as you make things private, that is no longer true. Bridging tokens is easy. Bridging secrets is hard. There was always a risk when moving in or out of a private zone. The people who are watching the chain, mempool, or network traffic could figure out who you are. Crossing the boundary between a private chain and a public one, or even between two private chains, leaks all kinds of metadata like transaction timing and size correlations that makes it easier to track someone. So the bridging, the transparency involved in bridges is going to make something like a midnight, according to this partner at A16Z, sort of a black hole. Once things can go in, but if you are really serious about privacy, a little bit harder to bring it back out. Compared to the many undifferentiated new chains where fees will likely be driven down to zero by competition, blockchains with privacy can have much stronger network effects. The reality is that if a general purpose chain doesn't already have a thriving ecosystem, a killer app, or an unfair distribution advantage, then there's very little reason for anyone to use it or build on top of it, let alone be loyal to it. I think Ethereum experienced this in the last cycle. There wasn't a lot of reason to be loyal to Ethereum if your only game was the meme coin casino. Why not go to the casino with the highest speeds and the lowest fees? I think Ethereum did experience that. When users are on public blockchains, it's easy for them to transact with users on other chains. It doesn't matter which chain they join. When users are on a private blockchains, on the other hand, the chain they choose matters much more, because once they join in one, they're less likely to move and risk being exposed. This creates a winner-take-most dynamic, and because privacy is essential for most real-world use cases, a handful of privacy chains could own most of crypto. Let me read that again. Because privacy is essential for most real-world use cases, a handful of privacy chains could own most of crypto. If this prediction is true, I want you to try to imagine scenarios where midnight somehow not ends up being one of this handful of privacy chains. It's like, in what world is it not part of a handful? I have a hard time naming a privacy chain that I think is ahead of Cardano. Who knows? Maybe that means I have idiosyncratic preferences for decentralization and ideals like that. Certainly, Wall Street would choose very different ideals than I would in terms of decentralization. But this is looking fantastic for midnight. Midnight might turn out to be the super moat. We never really got to talk about moats in crypto that much. We would talk about decentralization, heightened decentralization being a big moat for Cardano and crypto, and I still believe that. But a lot of people don't care about decentralization. I think for people who care about decentralization, it is a moat for Cardano. It's really hard for somebody in Cardano who values decentralization a lot to go to a centralized chain. But we also know a lot of people don't care about that. But if we take this as true, that privacy, the first sentence, privacy is the one feature that's critical to the world's finance to move on chain, that could be the super moat that Cardano never had. So we'll see how it goes with privacy. Who knows? Maybe the privacy chain, the privacy chains that make up this handful that could own most of crypto, maybe somehow, it turns out the choices made in midnight were wrong. And, there are preferences for things that, Midnight is not aimed at. That's always possible. But man, it sure looks like Midnight is in the perfect position to be a fantastic moat for us. Not only wide, not only deep, not only cold, but full of great white sharks. As Otis Frichov put it, sharks with laser beams. So I think this is pretty exciting. Jay Coco says, Ayo, let's fucking go. Let's go. Jay Coco, let's go. Doesn't seem like it is something Charles would do. Yeah, that whole thing was kind of bizarre. When he immediately came back on and talked about trillions in liquidity, like that being just a big joke, that's a little out of character for him. That's a little out of character too. When he makes jokes, he tends to make it pretty apparent it's a joke. I haven't seen him make a an otherwise super serious sounding statement and then come back like a day later and say, "Oh, just joking." That's out of character for him, and from my perspective. Jay Coco says, "Midnight rocks. So excited for 2026." Me too. Let's get rid of 2025. That was the whole theme of the video yesterday. We should burn our 2025 calendars. Never talk about it. It never happened. Never happened. The issue with privacy for finance is the illegal BS can be hidden. That's where selective privacy comes in, though, right? If you are doing illegal stuff, you can require the same sort of disclosures that any bank would require with selective disclosure, right? Only you can do it with ZK proofs. So instead of having to provide your ID with your address on it at the bank, you can just prove you are who you say you are. You can just prove you are in the US as opposed to North Korea, right? So illegal BS can be hidden, even in crypto normally. To the same extent, cash can hide illegal BS, right? It's like if you want to get a bunch of cash out of the bank and go buy something illegal with it, cash is the ultimate weapon. It's the best way to do illegal transactions. So you could argue, yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, if your choices are, not if cash is not on the table and your choice is like Cardano versus Midnight, you're probably going to look first at Midnight to do something illegal. But the best option would just be to go to the bank, go to the ATM and get cash, right? So we'll see how all that works out. I think it's going to be on the dApps to figure out how to require the right disclosure to avoid illegal transactions happening on the dApps. If you're just talking about peer-to-peer payments, I mean, crypto is already pseudonymous. So it's like Bitcoin, a lot of illegal transactions have been done with Bitcoin. Famously, that one study proved that it was only like 1% as much illegal stuff as goes on in cash. But you can already kind of do it with regular crypto. And Zcash and Monero have been around forever. I mean, Zcash is as old as Cardano. It's also a Dino coin, and Monero is even older. So you've been able to do peer-to-peer transactions with privacy coins for a long, long time. Aleo is the challenger to Midnight. So my question is, are there enough challengers that we're not in the handful of privacy coins that could own most of crypto? I don't think any one privacy coin necessarily needs to be number one. If this is true, and we don't know if this guy's right, this Ali Yaya could be wrong, but if he's right, then we just need to be in that handful. So Cardano is here. Thank you for joining. Samuel Flores is here. Thanks, BindoCam. I just joined the Midnight Discord. Oh, yep. Samuel got the answer he's looking for. Fly over me is here. BindoCam says, and on his point, if Cardano's ZK primitives can be utilized from to Midnight, oh boy. Yep. The interplay between Cardano and Midnight is going to be very interesting. If he is right that privacy coins are going to be kind of like black holes, because users who need the privacy or want the privacy aren't going to want to bridge back out because there's too much leakage of metadata. If that's true, then a very tight connection between Cardano and Midnight could be a really big deal. So let's talk about something else. So you'll remember we had this big thing with the big rumor last night. So the big rumor last night was basically uh did some bank get upside down shorting silver? Obviously, there's been this tremendous parabolic high in silver, the likes of which have never been seen. I think people are probably, widely aware of that story. And there was also this big rumor last night that some bank got upside down because of that parabolic high in silver. So one of the interesting things is part of the rumor involved the amount of liquidity being pumped into the system. And what was reported in those posts, part of it was true. Part of it was, undocumented, we'll put it that way. Part of it was unverifiable. But today, what we did see was this. So this spike is from today on the overnight repo chart. So if we look actually at the chart on Fred, you can see that bump right there, 16 billion today. This will be yesterday as most of you listen to this or watch this. Yesterday, we had this bump of 16 billion, and that is in fact the second biggest bump since COVID. If we zoom out a little bit on this chart, let's see, I guess we're gonna go to the 10-year. If we zoom out to the 10-year, you can see this is COVID. That is, yesterday was the second biggest bump in the overnight repo market since COVID. If you go out to the 10-year, go out to the 10-year, go out to max, sorry. If we go out to the max reading, sorry, this will come up at some point here. Here we go. You notice this is outside of COVID. This is like the second biggest bump this century. Yesterday was the second, let me say that again. Outside of COVID, yesterday was the second biggest bump in the overnight repo market since COVID. And if you haven't watched this channel recently when we talked about this, remember the difference between the reverse repo market and the repo market is a differentiator in terms of whether or not liquidity is going into the markets. So the repo market and the reverse repo market is the opposite of this, but the repo market is where where transactions are made in which the New York Fed, under the direction of the FOMC, buys a security from a counterparty. So a security comes into the Fed, dollars go out to that party. So it's liquidity entering the system. The reverse repo market is the opposite, but this one, the repo market, is liquidity going into the system. So remember, it was big news when Powell announced that we're going to do reserve management, which we're otherwise just calling QE, the new label for QE, of 40 billion a month. That was 40 billion a month. The repo markets by themselves did 16 billion in a day today. So that one was kind of interesting. So because of that rumor last night, earlier today, we saw Polymarket go crazy and predict there was a 71% chance of a US bank failure basically in the next month and a couple days of change. When you check this more recently, real time, that chance has gone from up here, eventually got to 74%, and currently it's down to 10%. So some of the numbers were checked. People were sort of looking at the news all day, and it never really materialized that any particular bank was going belly up. But remember, I mean, $16 billion were dumped into the market. So obviously, a lot of the banks that people were thinking about, these, systemically important, these global systemically important banks, obviously, we're talking about very big numbers, but a $16 billion injection is also a pretty big deal. So it looks like Polymarket's telling us we're not getting any kind of a bank failure. At least there's not enough evidence for people to be betting for one right now. So we'll see what happens. It seems like there probably was something. It seems a little coincidental that we have the second biggest bump in the overnight repo markets since COVID today, the very day after that rumor comes out. But who knows? Coincidences do definitely happen. So this was kind of interesting. And this is part of why I think people are starting to acknowledge the moat that Midnight provides to Cardano. Thank you again to Daniil for pointing this out. I appreciate that. So here's how this series of posts went. This is obviously an XRP account, right? XRP Army. Charles said that Midnight and XRP Ledger are already operating and performing at 100x the scale. You know, you can assign whatever level of veracity to that statement you want. But then somebody else, another XRP Army guy, came along and said, I just want Joel Katz to acknowledge Midnight before anything. And Joel Katz, who is the CTO at Ripple and one of the original architects of the XRP Ledger, responded, I hereby acknowledge Midnight. This is not the kind of thing we've seen with Cardano. If somebody in any ecosystem had said, I just want, one of the founders of my ecosystem to acknowledge Cardano, you would not, immediately find in many occasions the founder coming on and saying, I hereby acknowledge Cardano. That was not the kind of thing that happened. But I think there's something different going on with Midnight. People outside of Cardano are understanding something about Midnight that's very different than what they always understood about Cardano. This time, it's not about decentralization. For them, it's not about decentralization. It's not about pappers. It's not about technical architecture. Totally, partially it is, but not totally. It's about the fact that Charles was 5 years ahead of everybody on privacy. He was just way ahead of the curve. He built everything out. And a lot of, we've learned recently that a lot of what's in Midnight was adopted from other blockchains. I'm glad to see it. I'm glad they're not reinventing the wheel. They're using Jolteon consensus. They're, using all kinds of things from all kinds of places. So they didn't have to rebuild everything. Charles just made the decision before anybody else to YOLO into privacy. And thank God he did, because the timing is looking absolutely perfect. We're ahead of everybody. It's fantastic. We don't get to say that very often in Cardano. We are more the slow, deliberate, gradual, disciplined, rigorous, academically rigorous types. In this case, Charles just got out ahead of everybody. And I think we're going to get the benefits of that. Streetwise says, I'm prepared to drink this Kool-Aid, especially after years out here in the crypto desert. I kind of jumped the gun. I was going to make every single thumbnail a desert astronaut in the desert thumbnail until 2026. But we've had so much desert lately. I thought, how about we do the first, maybe one of the first ever thumbnails on this channel that's completely underwater. Like, you can see the castle in the background, but pretty much the entire thumbnail is underwater. The camera is completely submerged. We're in the water. So that was to make up for all of the astronaut dehydration you guys have had to witness over the last several weeks. Yeah, enthusiasts, let's go. Let's go. He overpromises too. Which one? Joel Katz or Charles? Or every crypto founder ever? I think you could probably say this about every tech founder ever. Definitely like Elon. Definitely vast majority of the crypto founders. Charles has been talking price predictions more than ever. He either listened to close counsel and or realized he must appeal to avarice to get over the finish line. It's working. Yeah, something's working. Something's working. Just in the last month, things have kind of, feels like things are going our way a little bit. Silver, yes. The crazy silver rumor has indeed been crazy. Jordan for America, let's fucking go. Looks like at Cardano maybe got caught up. Good for you. Jordan for America says, catch you on the commute. Thanks for joining. Aleo, number 268. What is I don't know too much about Aleo. What is 268, guys? What is 268? Welcome back, dude. Your holiday weekend. I hope your holiday weekend was all that. Yeah, it was a great holiday. Light the gill. Yeah, thanks for that though. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Immortal Hoskins way ahead of the pack. Yeah, I mean, I think it takes a couple stabs. You have to take stabs at things to when you're trying to be the think outside the box thing, I've done this on this channel before in terms of a Venn diagram containing sort of one circle being short term, crowd satisfying ideas, one circle being sort of disruptive outside the box ideas, and one circle being good ideas. It's like, if you're going to be in that outside the box disruptive idea circle, you got to take a few stabs at it before you get an idea that's also a good idea and also satisfying to the crowd, satisfying to the flock of sheep, right? It's like the sheep will not venture into disruptive outside the box ideas unless they're really good. They'll only go there if they're really good. So to get into that tripartite intersection in the Venn diagram, you're gonna have to take a bunch of stabs. So Charles has certainly done that. He's taken a lot of risks, and maybe this was the one. Maybe this is the one where he really hit it. Underwater is relatable for a lot of folks too, I imagine. Well put. Well put. Well put. Oh, is number 268 where Aleo is in market cap? I don't know a damn thing about Aleo, and maybe if they're at number 268, maybe that would explain it. If they have a smaller market cap than that much smaller than Midnight, if they're like 5 times smaller than Midnight, that would explain why I've never heard of them. I think maybe I've heard the name. Pindo Cam says, where I'm at, you wouldn't see the castle. Yeah, I guess it depends on the water viz, but yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Okay, that is it. Coin market cap Aleo number 268. Okay, so I probably won't intentionally not learn anything about Aleo until their market cap gets a little bit bigger. Did Ripple Labs receive a proportional share of the midnight distribution? I would guess so. I can't think of I can't remember reading anything that would have disqualified a Ripple Labs, right? It seems like that would have been kind of un-Charles-like for him to have done that when he wants Ripple Labs to be on board for midnight. I think it seems like the last thing he would do would be to disqualify Ripple Labs. So I actually don't know, but I can't remember reading anything that would indicate the opposite. So good question, though. Very good question, Frazek. Starting to believe that 2026 may actually be a good year. That's how I'm feeling. I'm feeling pretty good about 2026. In fact, we can look real quick. If people want to see that report, I don't know if people have seen this. This was a report. So this came out, this account, David Parker, he posted this as a bank just went under, which is that was pretty high. That kind of like ring of hyperbole when I read that. And then I went through this and I found the source of this. He didn't cite the source, but I found the source of it, which was this Substack, which itself wasn't very well sourced. Any post that reposted this got this. I guess the original post got these notes. The overnight repo market shows nothing beyond the 17.25 billion morning operation with zero demand at the afternoon operation. There's no communication from the New York Fed on any additional 34 billion. So they talked about 34 billion on top of the 17, which when we just looked at a second ago, turned out to be more like 16. So hard to say whether this was somebody just trying to scare the markets or something, or if this was a legit rumor. They claim the reports are concealing the name of the bank, but it is confirmed that overnight the Fed was forced to pump another 34 billion into the banking system. So who knows? It was weird. I would remind everybody, it was also pretty weird when the thing with SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, and Signature, and who was the other bank? When they went under, it was pretty weird and confusing at first. And it was kind of like the first indications I saw were a lot like this. They were kind of unconfirmed rumors, and you didn't see any solid information until it seemed like it took a couple of days. It kind of happened in slow motion. And then a couple of days later, all of a sudden it was like SVB's going under, which was hugely shocking to me. Oh, here we go. Grok says, no, Ripple Labs did not receive a proportional share of the Midnight Network's night token distribution. Okay. Okay, interesting. So Grok is wrong. I mean, pretty much all these LLMs are wrong about these kind of things sometimes, especially when it comes to crypto. I'll often ask Grok. I spent a lot of time with Grok lately, especially over the last month or so. And Grok, when I ask it a lot of things about Cardano that I absolutely know black and white, it's like I'm a little surprised how often it's wrong about Cardano stuff. And then I realized that it's just stuff I know because Charles said it like on an AMA, and it's not necessarily in any of the documents. So we'll have to get we'll probably have to get some more confirmation on that. So, but yeah, I agree with Frazek though. Very interesting. Okay, let's move along here to yeah, I think they've all gotten a lot better. They were much worse when everybody started using that first really mainstream version of ChatGPT. They were much worse, but um well, that's interesting. Anti-gravity comes with Claude Opus 4.5 tokens. Interesting. Yeah, Grok and I have gotten into some disagreements over stuff I absolutely know is true. And it's kind of wild how it'll just flip once you finally find like a good link that establishes your position. It'll like just totally flip. So okay, okay. Here's something else. I appreciate Adam Rush sending this. So you'll remember we talked about how the proposed NCL length was 100 epics. Instead of being 1 year, it was, which is something like 73 epics or so. Instead of being like 73 epics, which would have taken it to 1 year, it was 100 epics long. And it was a little bit puzzling why they chose that number, other than it just being a very round number. And Adam sent this, which I appreciate, letting us know exactly why they chose 100. So it's actually an attempt to get the Cardano NCL to operate on a fiscal year that starts around July 1st. You will notice that Epic 713 ends on July 3rd, 2027. So we will have the option of running the next NCL after that Epic from Epic 714 to 786, which ends on July 2nd, 2028. So basically, the reason why the Epic is like a year and a half long, roughly, is because they want to have a fiscal year that goes July to July. So probably a lot of people listening to this have worked in companies that either have fiscal years that coincide with the calendar year, which sucks in some ways because then everybody's trying to finish the fiscal year stuff in December. I've definitely worked in companies like that. And there are benefits to having a fiscal year that doesn't coincide with the calendar year, because then not everything has to happen in December when the maximum number of people are taking vacation anyways. So there's some benefits to this. What I still like about it, the thing that I like the most about it is still that it stretches the same 350 NCL into a period longer than a year, whereas our previous 350 NCL was like 9 months. So I like that we're actually using an NCL that's less per year than the one, much less per year than the one we've had for the last 9 months. So I think that's pretty nice. Samuel Flores says, not impressed with Grok. So which version of Grok are you using though? And what are you using it for? I've been using Grok quite a bit recently for vibe coding. And even though it's not really, obviously Grok is like a very general LLM, I'm kind of shocked how well it handles context sometimes. I've got it like I'm forcing it to deal with like a very long conversation with a lot of coding context. And I'm shocked, given that it's not really supposed to be, it's not really aimed at the vibe coding audience. I'm kind of shocked at how well it's handling the context. Definitely, not as well, I'm sure, as something like Claude, especially through an interface aimed at coding. But I'm kind of shocked how well it does with that. Hilldog, thank you. Sonic Chemist says, I've got a one-way ticket to midnight. I hope a lot of assets have a one-way ticket to midnight. That'd be nice. Brown Bearded Hermit says, there's no reason why a stipend couldn't come out of Midnight TGE's share of the distribution for a partnership with Ripple Labs. Yeah, the token generation entity So I recently looked into that because I was curious about exactly what that entity was. So I looked into some midnight documentation and found, I think I even found like the address and the full entity name for the entity itself. But yeah, it's kind of confused. This is all a little confusing. This doesn't have to be public until it's strategic to be public. Yeah, that's well put. That's well put in terms of a lot of these things. So I think today actually was not a gigantic news day. I didn't find very much hugely notable news today. So I am going to take off sort of the 31st and the 1st, just because I think a lot of people are going to be off for holidays anyways. So tomorrow there will be a video. The day after and the day after, the last 2 days of the week when I normally do a video, there will not be videos unless, of course, something very cool or very notable happens. Then, of course, I'll probably want to jump on and we'll talk about it anyways. BindoCam says, didn't Charles mention they tried to avoid project treasury addresses? Yeah, certain types. But you notice like the Cardano Foundation apparently got their midnight allocation. So, it depends. And I guess if you think about Ripple Labs, like Ripple Labs has gone to great lengths to point out that they are not XRP. They are this other private entity. So whether or not we characterize them as a project treasury, I guess maybe that label is not the label they would put on themselves, but I don't know. I would love to see kind of a breakdown of what large entities outside of Cardano actually got midnight allocations. That'd be interesting to see. Sonic Chemist, are you AOS going to set up your SPO to receive night? So in order to receive night, you've got to actually run a midnight validator. I would like to do it. It's pretty far off. Though. It's not happening ASAP. So the 4 phases of midnight are Hilo, Kukolu, Mohalu, and Ua. Hilo started on December 8th. Kukolu happens on Q1. That'll be a federated mainnet. So in Q1, in quarter 1 of next year, we'll get a federated mainnet. That means the SPOs are not going to be live running on the mainnet. In Q2, in Mohalu, that's when SPOs will start making blocks. So the SPOs are not going to start making blocks on mainnet for quite a while. We've just got to look at it and make sure it makes sense economically because there are costs associated with running a validator. So we've just got to make sure it's economically feasible and that it's going to be worth the time and everything. But obviously, I'm in favor of doing it. There's 2 other people involved in the AOS stake pool. So we just got to get together and make sure it works for everybody. Yeah, I'm the only one who does this channel, but there's 3 people in the stake pool. So we just got to look at it and make sure it works as it gets a little bit closer and we get a better idea of, what the economic contours of all that are going to be. But we'll see. I'm in favor of it though. Frazek says, Joe Davidson, cheers. Yeah, I support Louis Rossman and his right to repair, right to own, privacy, etc. movement. I am also with you guys on that. I'm definitely with you guys. Sweet Tuesday. Tuesday will be the last video of the year, unless, of course, something fantastic happens on New Year's Eve. If we get some kind of fantastic news on New Year's Eve, I will be inclined to jump on and talk about it, but probably tomorrow will be the last one of 2025. Thank God. Not thank God that it's the last video, but thank God 2025 will be ending. This has been a godforsaken hellscape of a year in crypto. I'll be glad to pretend like it never happened. D.U, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Brown Bearded Hermit says, night to the CF could have been a negotiation of the Pentad if it came in recently. I don't know anything about it being recent. What's the pledge? So pledge doesn't really work like that. Like, pledge, like the AOS Cardano, the Cardano AOS pool, we have a much larger pledge than is required. There's certain pledge does play into the sort of algorithm, but the amount that's required is actually much lower than we pledge in terms of Cardano. So thanks for saying that though. Thanks for saying that. Otis Fricio, thank you for joining. Binochem says Charles initially said they were getting nothing, so if they did, something changed. Yeah, I don't know. People can check that. People can check that. Maybe they got nothing. I don't know. I heard Charles in a recent AMA or something, or an interview. I heard Charles talking about the members of the Pentad. I'm paraphrasing, so I might be screwing this up. I probably am screwing up the way this was said, but he said something like he was talking about the members of the Pentad saying that they had significant allocations of Midnight, so they were all invested. So they were invested in the future of Midnight, but maybe he was talking about different members of the Pentad than the foundation. So somebody check on this and see if the foundation has any Midnight allocations. I don't know for sure. I'm just going off what I heard Charles say, but maybe I misinterpreted it. So Streetwise says, like if Cardano supplants the petrodollar as global exchange medium for crude oil. Man, I cannot imagine this happening. If only Streetwise, because they might prefer a stable coin, right? Maybe a Cardano stable coin, maybe USDC could supplant, maybe the petrodollar could be the petro, stable dollar or something. But man, if Cardano ever got to the point where it was going to supplant the petrodollar as a global exchange for medium for crude oil, none of us will be either making these videos or watching these videos because we'll all be so filthy rich. If SPO team is on the fence, when the time comes for night, let us know. Maybe we can help or figure something out. I don't think that's going to happen. We just haven't, there's just not enough information out there yet for us to figure out what the economic contours are going to look like. So I don't think that's going to happen, but I'll definitely keep everybody apprised for sure. Yeah, no, I thank you for offering that, Jeff. But yeah, we would never take you up on that. That would never be something we'd take you up on. But we'll get together and talk about it and we'll get it figured out. But we just need to wait until a little bit more information surfaces on what that's going to look like. So we're just kind of it's still pretty far off. I mean, mainnet is not going to happen until Q2. So it's still a ways off. Petro Doge. Man, if we ended up with a meme coin replacing the petrodollar, I might take exception to that. Sounds just as perilous as working with bricks on a gold-backed token. Yep. Hope blooms eternal. Yeah. I mean, hey, if I'll be happy if any crypto asset supplants the petrodollar, that'd probably be good for all of us. Preferably not a fucking meme coin, but any crypto asset is probably better than no crypto asset. I kind of think the future we're headed toward is more like, is not even so much like, is it a dollar or is it a crypto asset? I kind of think we're headed to a future where the dollar mainly becomes a crypto asset, in the same sense that, when I was a kid, almost all transactions you would do just sort of like on Main Street USA were going to be dollar transactions. Credit cards were around and people used them, but not the way they did later on, in the early 80s. You were using dollars, you were using paper dollars for a lot of things. And it would have been almost unimaginable then to say that, in 2025, nobody's going to have, paper currency in their wallets, basically. But I would have had a hard time believing that people would use almost no paper currency, but here we are. So here we are. We've reached that point in 2025. So okay, I think we've covered all of the news, all of the big news for today. Who knows? I'm always afraid. Yep, this is true. A fistful of quarters would get you places. That's true. Definitely as a kid in the 80s, I would wander around and just having a bunch of quarters in your pocket was enough. That was enough. Now it would be a joke. If you had like 3 quarters in your pocket, you pretty much can't buy anything. But back in the day, a bunch of quarters in your pocket, you could buy some things. I'm always, for some reason, I always think some big news is going to come out like at the end of the day on the 30th or on the 31st, knowing that pretty much nobody's going to be paying attention to any of these things on New Year's Eve and to some extent on New Year's Day. It's kind of like that Friday news cycle thing where like the White House administrations on both sides of the aisle like to release the bad news late on a Friday because they know it'll escape a lot of the news cycle. I've always thought of sort of the 30th and the 31st of December as the ultimate version of that. So we'll see. We might get some big news in the next couple of days. Hopefully, if we do, it's good news for crypto. But Holly says cash is still king here in the third world. Yeah, I definitely, the place that I go to pretty frequently, that's definitely very different than the place where I'm sitting right now. It's the same. Cash is definitely still king there. Revalue gold. Yeah, we shall see. So anyways, we may have some big news in the next couple of days. I never quite count that out at the end of December, but we shall see. I think we've covered all of the good news, all the good news for today. We shall look, JGS says we should all look forward to the next new thing Charles has been working on over the last few years. We should all look forward to the next new thing Charles has been working on over the last few years. That definitely describes Midnight. Total adoption of decentralized crypto is just one financial disaster away. Yeah, I kind of feel that way too, Frazek. I kind of feel that way too. I think it's a good note to end on. Thank you so much to everybody for joining. I hope everybody is starting out a good last week of 2025, and I will talk to you tomorrow night.